Well, how's everybody tonight? Yeah, it's a beautiful night tonight. Appreciate you coming in. Come on. There's only 5 of us that we got. Chasing everybody away. How's everybody doing tonight? Enjoying the weather? I'd ask you personal questions, but this is going on the internet, so. I want to talk about does this help this series at all? Does it help you with anything? Or is it just kind of interesting? Or I know I have a buddy that's been watching, if Kenny, how you doing, if he's watching tonight, but he and I both grew up with stories from the Old Testament that I just don't get. They don't make sense. They seem like they contradict. And even when I was a little kid, I remember we'd be reading something in the Bible, and we'd get to the line where it said, and that's why it's called this to this very day. And I'd ask my dad as a 6-year-old, I said, wait, this isn't being written in real time? You know, what day is it being written? And I don't know what he ever said about that. But so I've kind of always had those curiosities, and especially the ones that are strange, or the ones that just seem to kind of contradict other parts. So I always just kind of want to dig back in and find out more. And I don't know if this is a weird story to you tonight, but I want to talk about the Battle of Jericho. Is that a weird story to you? Do you know many times in history what was it that knocked the walls down?
Their faith in God.
Oh, good answer, Donna. Never says that, but that's kind of you taught it in Sunday school, yeah.
The implication.
I'm sure it was the 7 trips around.
7 trips around, or what? The shouting? Because that's how I think we should do all battles, is just yell at each other. And then go in and kill every man, woman, and child and leave none alive. That whole part is just, that's a weird story to me, even though we tell little kids this story like it's no big deal. And I wonder how many we've traumatized over the years.
It's funny, I remember with my kids growing up, we'd tell them all these stories because they grew up there, but now our granddaughters, Vicky will read theirs, I can't tell them that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Interesting difference.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, yeah. They didn't care. When I was in high school, they had a smoking section for the kids, and the teachers would go out and smoke with them. My parents got kicked out of school. They had smoking sections for us, and now it's illegal within 500 feet of a school. My generation, they did not care about us, Tom, not at all. So, well, why don't we just read it? The story is in Joshua 6. So if you've got a Bible, do you want me to tell you what to look for, or do you want to spot it on your own? So you know the basic things, right? Does it change vocabulary? And here's what's really hard, is because your English translation has tried as hard as it can to smooth it all out. It's like got a big giant layer of stucco over the top of it so that you can't see the seams anymore. But I have used my X-ray machine to, every week I do another passage or two or from another part of the Bible, and I go, oh, now I know what that word means. And then you find links between all these stories. So, but anyway, go ahead and read it, and then we'll walk through it. See how many you can see, something that doesn't make sense, something that contradicts, something that changes. All right. For all right, did you spot it? So I just reread it again in my NIV, which I haven't done for a while, and it's really hard to see. It is so smoothed over, and I can tell you there are several places where it just isn't. To make it flow smoothly, where they changed a word or two, because it's awkward otherwise. So I get it why most people, when they read their English Bible, don't see the layers or whatever, because I'll kid you. In fact, the first time I did this, like a couple years, 2 or 3 years ago, I went through this story and tried to spot it, and I actually have a version of my Kindle Bible that's all color highlighted, but 80% of the clues and stuff like that get wiped out in English. So, did you spot any weirdnesses or changes or? None?
Well, I thought when they
Well, I had two thoughts while I was reading it.
Great.
One was the Bible would be shorter if a lot of stuff wasn't repeated.
Yes. Oh, yes. Lots of repetition. And
Yeah.
sometimes, Donna, sometimes in one layer, it's very repetitive.
Yeah, and so And so then sometimes that gets a little tiring when you read that. Well, I've already done that. Or what's the
Yes.
point of telling me that again?
Right.
So-
Or telling it again differently. So this is like when Molly and I are telling a story sitting next to each other, because she thinks I'm forgetting details, and what I'm doing is editing. No, oh, you forgot to tell them this and this and this. And I said, no, I didn't forget. That just doesn't advance the plot, so I left it out. But then you have those layers, and they keep adding stuff to it. It gets longer and longer, so yeah.
Well, I thought all of a sudden, they started telling the story of Rahab,
Yeah,
which I guess is important to it, but I mean, it sort of was, we're adding that. And
that's
what
a
was this
recall.
last part about the,
That's a callback from the previous,
Yeah.
well, several chapters ago when Rahab
yeah,
lowered the spies down.
and then all of a sudden they're talking about cursed before the goddess who rebuilds the city.
Didn't that sound odd?
All of a sudden.
The whole cursing part, like he's in the middle of a battle and he stops the cursing part. Yeah, I think that's a priestly addition. And so then I have to stop and ask the question so what's the point of that? What's the point of that cursing? Because doesn't it seem like it's there on purpose? It's not just there on accident. That's an intentional stop right here and add this little piece of plot to it.
And then I was going to say, all these years, yes, so stories have seemed weird at time, and I think maybe I just haven't been able to follow what's
No.
been going on.
No.
Or that I don't really I'm not a person that looks for hidden meanings.
Right,
So
yeah.
then I'm just sort of left.
No. So I guess if I had any moral to this story or to this series of weird stories, my encouragement would be when you find things that seem weird like that in the text, don't think it's your fault. It's there on purpose.
Now I won't.
It's there on purpose. Stop and ask, I wonder why that's there and what possibly, because that sounds like it's someone who added something in there. What was their message? Because I think it's entirely possible. This is the way I receive the Word of God. Some people will do this kind of study about like an inconsistency or different hands in it to try to disprove the Bible, and that's not my heart at all. I want to understand it. I want to decode it, and so I'm always digging deeper. I'm not just okay with saying, okay, yeah, that seems weird that, that he did two different things, and maybe I'm just too dumb to get it. No, you're not too dumb. You're reading it right. And those stories that are offensive are supposed to get your attention. So, anybody else? Just to walk through it. What's your name, brother? Tell me your name again. Eric. Good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Oh,
Part that's kind of confusing is where he's saying or he demands that everybody be killed, right?
yeah.
It's kind of just,
Why kill every woman and child and all the animals and stuff?
Yeah.
Why? Once you've won the battle, why do that? That's a really good question. And honestly, for me, that's one of the more offensive parts of these stories. And I don't have an answer like, oh no, that's not offensive, you just don't understand. Or you just need to trust God with it, He knows what's right. I think sometimes we try to give people those answers or try to tell them that they're offended by Job because they're not reading it right. No, you're reading it right, that's what it said. And to find a different answer for it. So that's why I'm kind of doing this series, and whoever listens to it. I got a brainstorm a little while back. I have a copy of an old book I can't open, but back in the 1960s, there was a professor that wrote a book called The Bible and Its Sources. And he did the first 5 books of the Bible, and because of the print style back then, put different print styles with the different sources. And I've done most of Genesis and half of Exodus and half of I don't know how much of the Old Testament I've done, but most of the weird stories, the ones that interest me, I go and do the whole chapter. But, something like what I do on Wednesday night, Elijah Olson was here about 3 weeks ago, and he says, I wish my Bible was color-coded like yours, and I could see those layers, you know what I mean? Or just read it through or click on it. And in the last year or so, I've been making apps for some curriculum, for some missionary curriculums. And I have the ability, even just using Google Docs, to go on and to create that kind of a digital document where even, when there's an Easter egg word there, you can click on it and a little pop-up come up explaining why that word was important or why that made it priestly. Do you think that would be helpful to anybody? I mean, have it rest on the internet. Then you could do it when you're reading your devotion. You just got another translation to read, or you have a curiosity. I wonder what this story is. And hey, Charlie, come on in. All right, we're going to read it. We're in Joshua 6 tonight, Charles, and we're going to walk through it. So just in case you remember the layers that I talk about, this story is mostly Southern, but it's got a little, I think there's a nugget of it that was Northern. And then I think a lot of the text was Southern, and then there's a priestly after the exile element. And so here's what I'm going to look for. The Southern one is very short, very succinct, and it is a story about God knocking down the walls of Jericho and them going straight in. It's only like 2 verses long, 4 verses of it. And so now here's a puzzling thing, so I'm going to add even one more puzzle to it. Joshua came out of we don't know any exact dates, but somewhere around the 13th century would have been the Exodus and then the conquest of Canaan. And in about the 13th century, Jericho had already been destroyed. So this is not a crackpot theory. This is pretty well-established archaeology. It was a huge walled city at some point, and somewhere in the 3rd to 2nd century, during the Middle Bronze Age, it got destroyed, got conquered. And so here's one of the theories why would you tell a story of walls being knocked down at a place that was just a little village at that time of the conquest? And the idea is of a collective memory, kind of like I'm living in this village, but there's this giant walled city that's in ruins. And so I'm going to tell you a prophetic story about how that happened. And it might have even been an oral story from all down through the years about the fall of Jericho, but now it's going to be a story about putting faith in God. And there's the ruins to prove it, right? And so there's that part. It got built up again and then destroyed during the exile. And so after the exile, when those exiles were returning, once again, Jericho is just wiped to the ground. And so when those verses about the curse that anybody that rebuilds this and stuff like that, now they're prophesying over ruins. So I'm just going to walk through some of these, and I'll kind of, rather than tell you up ahead of time, just tell you when it happens. So this is the Southern introduction. Now Jericho was completely closed off from the presence of the sons of Israel, and no one went out, no one went in. From the presence of or before the sons of Israel. Another way to say that, on account of them. So they were so strong at that point that they had closed up the city. Now Yahweh said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, and its king, mighty in valor, and all the men of the battle will encircle the city." He uses this verb to encircle. So he uses this phrase, and this is a great preaching point. Randy Remington, who's our president, preached a whole sermon on this at one of our district conferences. I have given you the city. It's a great prophetic city if you're trying to evangelize your city, right? Because he says, and it's not just future tense, it's past tense. It's already been done. And I wanted to raise my hand right there in the pastors' conference and say, actually, Pastor Randy, there's no such thing as past, present, and future in Hebrew. Of course I didn't. I'm not that big of a nerd. And I'm good friends with him. I didn't even tell him later because I don't like to criticize people's sermons. But he's not entirely wrong. There's no past and present and future. What there is 2 aspects to the verbs. There's perfect and imperfect. So perfect means it's done. It's fun. Imperfect means it's either ongoing or it's going to happen. That makes sense? So a lot of times when you put it in perfect, it could be past, present, or future. And you can use past tense to say perfect. A lot of times that's it. But it can also mean, instead of this will happen, this shall happen. So it's like definite. It's so definite, the Lord's saying, this is so by my hand and by my strength that you haven't conquered it yet, but it's already been done in the Spirit. That's a really great preaching point, isn't it? I'll pull that out in a sermon someday. But it's so sure, his promise is so sure that it's already as if it's been done. So it's in the perfect. It's the difference between something might happen and something shall happen. So I have given it, I said, or I shall give it. So this is all a part of the southern story, by the way. So who's the southern? The King Hezekiah, who is inside the walled city himself, so it's kind of a reversal, and the Assyrians are going to lay siege to him. So the point of this battle is that battles are not won by walls. Hezekiah built an extra wall that's about 20 feet wide before the Assyrians came. We have that excavation in Jerusalem. We go and see it when we go and see Jerusalem. But 20 feet wall, that means you're getting ready for a serious enemy. But the prophetic part of this story is the battle is not going to be won by your walls. The battle's going to be won by your Lord. So that's it. That preaches in Sunday school, doesn't it? And going around the city one time. This is so important. In the southern story, their instruction from the Lord is encircle the city and go around it one time. This is very important. How many times, Tom? One. This is like Hunt for Red October. One ping, Vasily. One ping only. Nobody seen that movie? One time. And then it says, now here's the priests. They're going to add something. Talk about repetitive, Donna. The most repetitive are the priests after the exile. They're very detailed. You remember these? They're all about what? Anybody remember what their themes are? So after the exile, the temple was destroyed, so it can't be about that. The ark was disappeared by the Babylonians, so it can't be about that. Can't be about David's king. And after the exile, they tried to have a king reestablished for a while, but it was basically the priests were in charge, the Levites. And because even in exile, they didn't have the temple anymore, they didn't have the land, they didn't have Jerusalem. All they had was Scripture, and what else? What ritual did they do? And the Sabbath, and the circumcision. This is about the priests leading a templeless religion. You with me? So, but we still have this. And so it says, and they shall do it 6 days, and the 7 priests will bear the 7 shofars of Jubilee. It's a very specific phrase. The shofarot. And Jubilee is Sheba. It's the same word as for 7. So over and over and over, it's almost like a Dr. Seuss, like Zizzer, Zazzer, Zuz. They're going to bear the Sheba priests will bear the Sheba shofars of Jubilee. And Jubilee can also mean, NIV says ram's horn. Yobel is kind of, it can kind of mean like a ram or a goat. But really, most of the time that word is used is in the book of Leviticus. And it's about the Jubilee, the 50th year, the 7 weeks. And so the Jubilee really is tied into the 7, and that's all post-exile. And on the 7th day, you shall encircle the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow on the shofars. So does anybody get like a theme from the priestly layer? Anything they're trying to remind you of? 7. They like 7. And why 7? Because 7 is the Shabbat, is the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath. Every line in this, the 7 trumpets, the 7 priests that blow the 7 trumpets, march around it 7 times, it's saying, keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath. The word Shabbat is related to the word 7, Sheba. And so it's tied in. It's the seventh day. So it's a word play, but you can tell, especially when it gets, and Donna, this story would go a lot faster if they didn't keep putting 7s in there. All right, so, and then it says, and I think this is the old kernel of the story, and this is how long it is. And it will be, and then this line completely mystifies me. I don't know. I have it blue right now. When the Karen, it uses a different word from shofar, is a ram's horn. And so is a Karen, but that's usually Southern, it's usually speaking of the authority of the king. You've exalted my horn above my enemies. It's a ram's horn, and that word is Karen. But then it says it's a Karen of Jubilee, and then it says when it sounds long, this is verb, and one of the other times it's used is in one of my other stories, which is Mount Sinai, when the thunder and the lightning come, and there's this long blast of the ram's horn. Remember this in this story? Nobody remembers this story. There's a long horn, and that's from the priestly there, so I think it's priestly. But let me just read the short northern version, can I? And it will be when you hear the sound of the shofar. How many shofars? No. Just listen to what, in this one, in this layer, in the priestly layer, there were 7 shofarot. In this one, he says, when you hear the sound of the shofar, singular. NIV smoothed all that over, but in this version, it just says, when you hear that sound of the shofar. So in one layer, there's 7 shofars that blow. In this one, there's just one. When you hear the sound of the shofar, all the people will shout a great teruah, and the wall of the city will fall flat, and the people will go up one man before another. So there's a bunch of vocabulary that's just unique to this little section. And it's repeated one time, because the conclusion of it is almost identical to those 5 lines, only without the horn blast. And what is a teruah? So here's a real Easter egg. Teruah was a festival. A teruah means to blast or to shout. It can be both. It can be on a horn or with your voice. And the Teruah festival was a new moon festival that happened up in the northern kingdom. And so in this section, the fact that it uses the word Teruah just twice, it really makes me think that this is the old northern kernel of the story of how Jericho got destroyed. And God destroyed it. And so in the northern version, you blow the shofar once and then the people shout. In the priestly version after the exile, you blow on the seven shofars. All right, then I'll keep going. And Joshua, the son of Nun, called to the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark." So in the southern layers, the priests have one role: they carry the ark. In the priestly layer, they blow the trumpets. So they have 2 different roles. That's how you know which priest you're talking about. And it calls it, take up the Ark of the Covenant. Because anybody remember what was in the Ark? Yes. In the priestly layer, all that was in there was the 10 Commandments, the covenant. So they called it either the Ark of the Covenant or they called it the Ark of the Testimony. Those are priestly phrases. But do you remember what else it had in it? Aaron's budding staff and a pot of manna. And was there something else? There was one other thing. So that's a different tradition. So in the northern tradition, afterwards, the only thing that was in there was this. And even though they didn't have the ark, they still had this. So it becomes the Ark of the Covenant. In the southern version, they called it the Ark of Yahweh. And so when it talks about the ark, you'll find at least 4 or 5 different titles of it. And so the southern version, it would have just said the ark or the Ark of Yahweh. In the priestly version, it says the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of the Testimony, or it says the Ark of the Lord of all the earth. That's another title that it gives to it. And so anyway, and the 7 priests will blow on the 7 shofars of Jubilee before the Ark of Yahweh. That's confusing to me because that's the southern version. I'm just going to keep going. And he said to the people, "Pass over and encircle the city, and the armed men will pass over before the Ark of Yahweh." It uses this word Passover a lot. And the Passover was a part of the southern tradition, but it uses this word a lot. Passing over the Jordan, passing over this, passing over. They pass over to the other side. They just use that verb a lot. And it just means to pass through or whatever, but I think it's an interesting one. And it was when Joshua spoke to these people and the 7 priests that bore the 7 shofars of Jubilee, and they passed over before Yahweh. Do you see how it keeps getting inserted? Londa, it keeps getting, this is like what Molly does. Mike, you forgot to say that part again. No, I was just trying to make, and then they blew on the shofars, plural, and the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. So now it's the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh, not the Ark of Yahweh or the Ark of the Covenant. and it went behind, and the armed men went before, and the priests that blew on the shofars, and the rest went behind the ark, going and blowing on the shofars. So when this gets turned into a paragraph, all of this gets smoothed out. But this is one of the hardest verses to iron out. Molly's doing puzzles, and she's got a puzzle board, and it has drawers on the side. Her first step is to organize the pieces into their groups, into the colors, and that's kind of part of, she does that before she starts putting the whole thing together. And so before I can see the pattern, I've got to identify which vocabulary goes with which one. And man, all of this disappears when you translate it and get rid of those uniquenesses. But if you took all of the blue parts off, the gold part all by itself makes sense. It just says the ark of Yahweh went behind, and the armed men went before, and the rest went behind the ark. Simple. Until you add in, don't forget about the priests and the shofars and all that. So what is it emphasizing? What are the priests? Tom, you got any idea about what are these priests after the exile? What are they trying to emphasize is going to win the battle?
The importance of the priests.
And the importance, and what are the priests leading? When they're blowing on those trumpets, they're kind of worship leaders, right? Yeah, the importance of the priest. Don't leave out the priest. It's hard to tell when it kind of gets blurred. Who's in charge of this thing? It sounds like the priests go ahead, and in the other story, the armed men go ahead, and then the ark, and then the rest of the people. But now the priests go ahead, blowing their trumpets, and I used to preach this as a worship leader, because you got to remember, the first thing that has to go forth is worship. Worship and prayer, and they're kind of championing that, right? Is that, they're the worship leaders after the exile. They're trying to get this whole thing going, and people focusing on the Lord. And so it just becomes a story that had several different lives, and what was important in one kind of got added on. Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, "You shall not shout, and you shall not make a sound with your voice, and not a word shall proceed from your mouth until the time I say to you, shout, and then you shall shout." Now I got a couple questions about this point. Now you got it, but weren't they already blowing on the trumpets? They were already tooting the seven. Go back and read it. They were already blowing the trumpets. What good does it do Joshua to say, "Now don't make a peep"? Now everybody be really, really quiet until I tell you. So up until this point in the southern story, they hadn't made a peep. He says, we're going to sneak up on them and then shout. And then now what's the signal? When do you know it's time to shout? Because Joshua yells, "Shout." That's the signal. So Joshua says, "You have any questions?" I say, "I have one." What's the signal again? I thought it was, because one time you said it was 7 trumpets, and then it was 1 trumpet, and then we shout. Now you say you're going to tell us to shout. Is it you're going to say, are we going to go on 3, or is it going to go 3, 2, 1, and then shout? Because I don't want to be the guy that's like, "Ah!" I wasn't supposed to yell that. It just gets comical to me. It's kind of funny. And it doesn't make sense. It's contradictory unless you sort out the layers. Then the story makes complete sense. So, oh, no, I get it.
Because Joshua's voice will be over those trumpets. It'll
Yeah.
be louder than those shofars, right?
Yeah, I don't think in Joshua's story there were shofars.
I agree.
It was just a shout. And, well, maybe there was, in the northern story, there was one shout and then everybody, but even that contradicts, because he says, when you hear the sound of the shofar, then shout. And Joshua says, no, I'll give them the signal. Man, that kind of confusion on the battlefield will mess up the battlefield. I always remember in Last of the Mohicans, a scene I can't show in church. Last of the Mohicans, my favorite part of that whole movie is when the Indians are waiting in the Mohawks are waiting in the woods, and the British Army goes marching down through the field, and they're all hiding and being quiet until they get in the middle, and then just one Indian with a Mohawk screams and goes yelling, goes yelling out there and gets shot. I'm just like, there's always one guy. Just can't wait. That guy was so amped up. He just ran out there and got shot. You don't want to be the tip of the spear in that type of situation anyway. Don't know why these things come to my head, but they do. And so the ark of Yahweh encircled the city, going around it one time, Vasily, one time. And then they came to the camp and lodged at the camp. And then Joshua got up early in the morning, which is what you do in the southern stories. You get up early in the morning. That's what Abraham did. That's what all of these people do. And that's a very southern phrase. And they took up, I'm sorry, I did this Yoda speak. That's how it says it. And the priests took up the ark of Yahweh, because they carry it, and the 7 priests bearing the 7 shofars of Jubilee before the ark of Yahweh. So in one story they carry the ark, the other one they carry 7 trumpets. And they went continually and blew on the shofar. So they're blowing and blowing and blowing, and they haven't been given the signal to yell yet. And the armed men went before, and the rest went after. The ark of Yahweh went, and blowing on the shofars. Just doesn't make sense in that. Now it sounds like the people are blowing on them. But anyway. And they encircled the city on the 2nd day 1 time. And they returned to the camp. And they did this for 6 days. So that's a confusing phrase even in English. I want you to go around the city 1 time, but do it 6 days. And then he goes on, he says, and it was that on the 7th day, they rose about the dawn of the day. Oh, I love this. The story of the Levite's concubine last week. The priestly layer, it gets up twice in the morning. In the priestly layer, it says the man inside the house, the Levite, it says he got up in the dawn of the day. So that's just ties it into that layer. Now we just made one of those connections. I'm going to be like one of those crazy conspiracy theorists with yarn all over some kind of dartboard in my house, in the basement of my house. You're going to come down there and just see lines going all of these weird scriptures. But just because you're crazy doesn't mean that people aren't out to get you. Okay. And they encircled the city, and in this time, in the same manner, 7 times. Why 7? Because that's the Sabbath. Only on this day they encircled the city 7 times. And it was that on the 7th time, the priest blew on the shofars. Are you getting the point yet? I don't know if you're listening. 7 times. Keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath. And then Joshua said to the people, shout, for Yahweh has given you the city. And so there's 2 things. One is to shout, and the other is that Yahweh has given it. So this is a prophecy to Hezekiah. Don't worry about those Assyrians. God has given you this city of Jerusalem. He's going to protect you. It's a done deal. Right, exactly. So that just shows to me that seems evident to me. I'm really not changing. It's the most literal translation that I can muster that still makes sense in English. So I'm not adding emphasis that isn't there. I'm just showing you what the words are. But yeah, in English it'll just smooth that out, and and it'll say that someone else shouted it or something like that. And Yahweh has given you the city, so it's a done deal. And then it says, and she shall be a cursed city. It uses feminine pronouns for her. I guess that's her preferred pronoun is her. She's a she, her, Jericho. And I'm sorry, and her and all that are in her unto Yahweh. So she's cursed unto Yahweh. And so I think this is post-exilic. It could be, the second working theory I'm working on, it could be Deuteronomistic too, because the Deuteronomist is the one that knew about the exile. And so either way, it's a different layer. And it uses this word, it's the first time in the story, it uses the word harem. So are you familiar with the harem? So in the Hebrew Bible, the harem was a curse. It was an Old Testament idea that when you destroyed a city, or that when someone was destroyed or someone committed a heinous sin, the idea behind the word is there's no half measures will do. And it's a very ancient concept. It doesn't fit well with modern thinkers like us. We don't do that. We don't just, well, I guess closest thing would be the atomic bomb in World War II. But that was because of the situation that we were in. By and large, we don't just kill every man, woman, and child in a place. But the harem was kind of almost like a spiritual thing, and it was kind of like the idea that the sin of that person or the sin of that place was so complete that they needed to be completely destroyed, not just partly destroyed. And it was almost like a spiritual, a total destruction. It was almost like an act of spiritual warfare. It was like they were a cancer. And if you have a cancer, how much of the cancer do you want them to get rid of? every last cell. And so there's a harem in the story of Saul that's pronounced on the Amalekites. And you remember that's why Saul got rejected as king, because he saved King Agag and didn't destroy him completely. That's all a post-exile story. So in the northern tradition, Saul was the hero. In the southern tradition, Saul was jealous of David because David was Hezekiah. In the priestly tradition is where you have Saul completely rejected because he didn't commit the harem. And so another theme of the post-exile too is of complete obedience. So how much of the idolatry should be gotten rid of? You know, we used to be faithful before the exile, but because of our idolatry, we got put into Babylon. When we come back, how much of the idolatry are we going to let go this time? And the answer is absolutely none. Not a single part of it. And so this is representing this harem. So I find it comforting that this is a story told by priests to emphasize that holiness and absolute obedience to the Lord, right? I also find it comforting to say that when the priests came back and were writing this, Jerusalem was uninhabited. Jericho was. So this isn't necessarily for me a story of God telling them kill every man, woman, and child. This is a priestly story about being absolutely pure. It's more of an allegory. And same with the 7 nations. Go in and wipe out all of the inhabitants of Canaan, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Jebusites. Remember all those ites? None of those people groups existed after the exile. And so this is another collective memory where it's telling a story about something that's already happened. So only Rahab the harlot shall live, and all that are with her in the house, for she hid the messengers that were sent out. So the story of Rahab the harlot is a southern story, and it's to say that even if you're on the kingdom that got destroyed, if you would just be faithful to God's people, you can be accepted too. So this is the story of Rahab now she is a prostitute in the story. That's no other way to translate that. It's a zona. But the idea is this is another one like Ruth and Boaz of redeeming the remnant of the north and inviting them to come in. And so Rahab the harlot actually becomes part of the genealogy. Okay. Only you keep from the accursed thing. All 4 of these words are the words harem. Go and completely destroy. Harem, the word cursed. Harem, it's with a het. Only you keep from the harem thing, lest you be harem when you take from the harem thing, and make the camp of Israel harem, and trouble it. This is a foreshadowing to the next chapter when Achan steals some of the devoted things, which is a symbol of having idols in the camp. And they lose the next battle, and then they bring them out, and they draw lots one by one, and they find out that the things that got stolen were under his tent. And so him and his whole family come out, and they pile rocks on their head. Those extreme stories are from post-exile. Achan's sin and the piling the rocks on his head is saying this needs to be our attitude towards idolatry going forward, right? Take this serious. So the priests would take any kind of story, and they always ratchet it up. I say the priestly layer after the exile, they were so adamant. You said it a great way last time, Tom. It has to be terrible because that's how terrible the story was, right? But they're the ones that cranked it up to rated R. And even to my ears, or to modern ears, makes it kind of like, well, if that's the God of the Bible, then, I don't want any part of it. But it says, but all of the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and iron, here's an Easter egg, because Joshua would have happened in the Bronze Age. They didn't have iron yet. So that tells you that it's written in the Iron Age, which would have been Hezekiah or after that. And it is holy unto Yahweh. So just like the other stuff was harem, now it's holy. Now it's kadosh, which means devoted and precious to him. Those are kind of the opposites. If it's harem, then you're not supposed to touch it. But if it's holy, you're supposed to bring it into the temple, and that has to happen while the temple is standing. So that's a Hezekiah era thing. And it shall come to the treasury of Yahweh. And so the people shouted and blew on the shofars. Now see, now it's okay, why not? I don't mind. And now here's the callback and the bookend to the last part of the northern story. And it's almost identical to the previous part. It says, and it was when they heard the sound of the shofar, one shofar, and the people shouted a great teruah, then the wall fell flat. And the people went into the city, one man before another, and took the city, and utterly destroyed all who were in the city, from man to woman, from young to old, and to sheep and to donkey. That kind of rhythm, that kind of pattern, doesn't it remind you of Genesis 1? And the sheep and the feast, each after their kind and all that. That's the priestly voice. So for a man to woman to sheep to donkey, it just goes into, what did the donkeys do? All right. The message of that layer is this is how you deal with idolatry. You don't leave any of it around. You get rid of it all. If you're going to get rid of sin, no half measures. Get rid of it all. Get rid of it all. If you're going to get off drugs, don't have a bunch stashed in your dresser. Know what I mean? Get rid of it all. You got to empty that all. Remove the very temptation. And so this is more of an allegory for me of how to deal with sin. And then it says, destroy them. So it says, and they took the city with the edge of the sword. Edge of the sword, it's one that I've just discovered in the last couple of weeks. It's the word is P-cherub. Sorry, P is P-I-Y. I should have said that before I said that word. But P means mouth. So it's the mouth of the sword. So it literally means it's a euphemism for the edge of the sword, right? The mouth being the leading edge, I guess, of your face. But it's just a little unique Easter egg. It's a little fingerprint of the Southern story. He likes to use the phrase, with the edge of the sword. So you could say that 100 different ways. But when I see edge of the sword, I go, that's gold automatically. Edge of the sword, Job's story. And they put the servants to the edge of the sword. But the men who spied out the land, Joshua said, go to the house of the harlot woman and bring the woman out from these and all that she has, for you swore to her. So keeping your oaths important in the South. So the young men who were spies went and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all that were hers and all her family. And they brought them out and left them outside the camp of Israel. But the city they burned with fire and all that was in her. Only the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and iron they put in the treasury of the house of Yahweh. Start to hear these layers now, which ones go with which. So Rahab, the harlot, and the house of her father and all that she had, Joshua saved alive. She dwells in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers that Joshua sent out to spy out Jericho. And I can only imagine this thinking, because it's many generations later, that means that her family is still a part of our family in Jerusalem. That her family or her lineage, and she shows up in the genealogy. And so we know that. There's Rahab right there. So she becomes, and so is Ruth, who was a Moabitess, part of the northern kingdom. Those are stories about incorporating those foreigners that will be faithful to Yahweh can be a part of the family. So that's a part of that message of inclusion. Yeah, because we're all Gentiles, right? And so Joshua withdrew at that time, saying, cursed is the man before Yahweh who raises up and rebuilds the city of Jericho. In his firstborn shall be the laying of the foundation, and in his last shall set up its gates. And so Yahweh was with Joshua, and his name was in all the land. With is a very big deal. It just is Im. So Hezekiah has a prophetic name when he's born. Isaiah says his name's going to be called Emmanuel. God is with us. And that in turn becomes a prophecy about Jesus, the Messiah. It started in Hezekiah's time, but that is a very prophetic word, a short little prophetic word, Im. So Barak says to Deborah, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. And that word is im. And so she goes with him. So it's a message of togetherness. And as long as you have the Lord on your side, you'll win the battle. Yeah? What do you think? Jericho is the Canaanite name for the moon god. So we think that Jericho was it's an old Canaanite city, and that it was probably a center of the moon god worship. Each one of those cities kind of had their own particular god that they worshiped and that they had a temple to. So, very old city. It goes way back to the Stone Ages. They find there. It's down in the valley, and it's got several natural springs. So that's the kind of thing that you just, in Israel where it hardly ever rains, that's a really big deal. The Bible calls it the city of palms. But by the time Jesus came along, Alexander the Great kind of rebuilt it, and Herod reestablished it, and then it was so prominent that Jesus used it for the Good Samaritan. He was on the way from Jerusalem down that long, dangerous road to Jericho. And that's where he got hijacked. But anyway, moral of the story is, you're not saved by your walls. I like what Donna said at the beginning. She already knew. Have faith in God. The battle's not going to be fought in the strength of your own weapons, in the strength of your own flesh, but it's going to be your faith in God that's going to get it done. And then don't forget to blow the trumpets and worship and do all that stuff.
And God will save you if you're faithful, even if you're not of his people.
Yeah. Even if you're not of his people, he'll save you. Even if you've got a sketchy background.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's very important. It's always surprised me about that story. Why does it have to say that she's a prostitute? Okay, because that's part of the message. Is that even a foreigner? It's not about who you are, where you came from. It's about what you do. Be faithful to the Lord, and he'll be faithful to you. Yeah, and he'll save you. Such a really poetic. I used to love that. I even did a sermon and drew a picture of that. Hang the scarlet thread out your window. That's just great storytelling. But the scarlet thread. What else? Do you want to do any more of these? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what the next ones are. You ready? Mount Sinai. It's an amazing story. I've got 3. If you want to hear them, I'll bring them. If you don't, that's all right. I'll put them on that little app and tell you where they are. But Mount Sinai is really curious to me. Have you ever read the story? Exodus 19. He tells them, all right, get ready. Tomorrow I want you to come up on the mountain. He says, tell the people to come up onto the mountain. I want to meet with them. But tell them if they touch the mountain, I'm going to break out and kill them on the spot. And then he wonders why the people don't want to come up. It's one of those stories. Okay, what's my answer? Layers. There's layers, all right? There's really actually at least 3 layers, and they're pretty obvious to pick up on, but take a while to... these 3, I actually did these in reverse order. So this is after these 3 stories. I really almost wanted to do them in order as like a 4-part, but I had Jericho done because Reggie came and asked me about it last week. So I already had it done. And I'm still working on the other ones. And every time I work on it, I'll go and I'll sleep on it. I'll come back and go, or I'll read another book. And I just like, some of them I'm not quite sure. It's a puzzle. But the other one doesn't sound real weird, but the crossing of the Jordan, when the priests put the ark on their shoulders and they go down into the water and then it stops up. There's layers in that. And then there's, is that just 3 parts? Yeah, just 3. I don't have 3 others. I have 2 others. And then if you think of any others, but those are all part of a 3-part series. They're kind of, what do they call that? A trilogy. They're kind of a trilogy of ark stories and blowing the trumpets. And some of these same characters show up because the same guys, the same priests that are carrying the ark around Jericho, before that, they're the guys that carried the ark through the Jordan. And I'm starting a brand new series. I've been praying for a new series for Sunday morning. Sometimes it comes long ahead of time, but I'm going back to the New Testament and talk about the gospel of Jesus. So not the gospel about Jesus, according to the Apostle Paul, but the gospel of Jesus, basically talking about the words that he says.
When you're talking about the priests
Yeah.
Are you talking about Sadducees and Pharisees, or are you talking
Nope.
about
These are in the Old Testament. So these would be priests from the time of King Hezekiah. So like just after 722 BC. So 700 years BC. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees were during the time of Jesus.
Right.
Okay. So there were a lot of civil wars that happened between those two.
These are like the Levites,
These are the Levites, yes?
same ones that carried
Yeah,
during the Exodus.
right. Yeah. And that's from the priestly layer. So it's really important that the Levites carry it. I tell you where I get that. There's two stories about Uzzah dying. Here's where I separated it. Remember Uzzah? What did he do?
He studied the art.
Yeah, the ark was going to fall off the cart, so he studied it, and God fried him. Once again, story I said, I need more information, Lord. Even David cried out about that. Okay, there's two versions of the story. One happens in Samuel, I think. One happens in the book of Samuel, which is from Hezekiah's time, which is pre-exile, right? In that one, it says that he studied the ark because, and the only reason it gives is because he wasn't afraid of the ark. So like the moral of the story is we need to really revere that thing. It's very important. You can't just be grabbing it willy-nilly, right? So the moral of that story is to add reverence to the ark, which in Hezekiah's time sat in the temple. So they actually had the ark. The fancy ark was in Hezekiah's temple before the Babylonians destroyed it and took it, and it never existed. The ark never existed after the exile, regardless of what the movies say or the Ethiopians. Several different Ethiopian churches claim to have the ark. They don't, but they claim it. After the exile, that same exact story is told by the priestly layer. Only this time, they say when Uzzah, he reached up and grabbed the ark and he was fried on the spot because the ark wasn't being carried by Levites. So the agenda of the story changed. So that's kind of one of the first places that I get, oh, okay, I get it, because that's Chronicles, and we know without any question that's written after the exile. That said, okay, that's a shift in their theology. And so in that case, they didn't collate the story. One's in one book and one's in the other. In this story, they just took those two versions and did this with them. They cut and pasted them together. And so we could do that with that story too, right there, about Uzzah. We could take both Uzzah's stories and kind of overlay them, and you'd have something like this where it goes back and forth of why did he die. So same thing with the Gospels. The Gospel will tell the same story over again in a different way with different words because it was written to a different audience. I was just reading a new book, a couple of new books, but there's a theoretical book of Jesus sayings. They call it Q, the sayings gospel. And that theory just comes from because Matthew and Luke say a lot of the exact same stories, so they kind of think that maybe there was a common version before those were written. And then Mark was written to a Gentile audience. And so it was one of the earliest. So the earliest gospels were Q and Mark. And Mark was written to Gentiles because he's always saying, he'll use a word like Talitha cum, and then he'll say, that means little girl, get up. So he's speaking to people that don't speak Aramaic, they speak Greek. And then later on, the church split, when Paul and the disciples decided, you go to the Jews, we'll go to the Gentiles. So Matthew was written for the Jewish half of the church, and Luke was written for the Gentile half. And so I'm going back to see if I'm just going to focus on Q. I'm going to focus on the sayings of Jesus that are in those. And I think people need help figuring out how to live their life right. Don't you think so? So I'm going to go back and a lot of Sermon on the Mount and that kind of stuff. But that's Sunday mornings. All right, guys, thank you. Appreciate your time. I know it's just a few of us and whatever, but...
Thanks, sir. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, Charlie, you'd be surprised. I do this for fun, so this is my... It's really weird. But Molly does puzzles. I get up every morning for my devotions and decode another story from the Hebrew Bible. And it's, I can get about 90% of it now. I still need tools for some of the words and stuff and to correct my math, but you know, I can go 5 or 6 verses without needing help, just decoding it. So, and you know, that just gets better with practice.
Any confusion with tense?
With what?
Tense, T-E-N-S-E.
Tense.
The tenses of the, are you talking about the
Present tense, past tense.
There is none. There is no tense in Hebrew. It just has perfect and imperfect. Oh, but this is the one. The next chapter after the, I'll probably talk about it. But the next chapter after the Mount Sinai is the 10 Commandments. I never thought I'd say this. In the 10 Commandments, there are layers. There are layers. Man, just you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That's Yahweh your God. So that's obviously a Yahwist type of thing. I think some of the basic commandments are just, they can be very, very old. But then it says, for God will not hold guiltless anyone who takes the Lord's name in vain. Why does he have to add that line on? That's the Deuteronomist. And it says it with the different words. Or, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Fine. In the image of anything in the sky above or on the earth below and stuff. That's priestly. That's how he talks. He's the guy that wrote the creation story. And it goes on and on and on about how many different idols don't you want to make? Well, can't he just say, don't make any idols? You know, so there's layers to that. But anyway, interesting to me. Thank you, guys. Lord Jesus, I just thank you for your word tonight. I thank you, Lord, for teaching us and instructing us. And I just pray, Lord God, that the more we read your word, the more we be familiar with your heart. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.